Hi, everybody. It's your host, Samantha and Trecia, and we're back with another episode that you don't want to miss on the Deeper Than Tech podcast, where we talk about how to grow your career in an industry that was not designed with us in mind. We'll be diving deep into this topic, but before we do, if you're loving this podcast so far, make sure you head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. So a lot of times with any front-end application, we need to have some styling, and a lot of times that's with CSS. But they have these things called a CSS framework. What exactly is that?
Okay, so a CSS framework, if I could put it in simple definition, is a ready-to-use CSS library. And so it's like a collection of style sheets, the style sheet collection that makes a job of UI designers very easily. So it's just ready to use CSS library. That's how I can define what a CSS framework is.
What is a popular CSS framework out there?
I would say it goes down to two, which is Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS. So I have not used Bootstrap myself personally, but I have seen how it is used in other projects. But I'd say the best of the two that are most popular is Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS. Yeah.
Okay. Are there like a lot of differences between the two, or is it just like a choice of preference?
Well, there is a difference, of course. So with Bootstrap, it is predefined, pre-made CSS components. So you don't really have to build your components from scratch. And then with Tailwind CSS, it uses utility classes. And so what I like about Tailwind CSS is that with utility classes, you are not restricted to, build a component. Like you can customize your component however you want to, and it does not limit you to customize your component. And so with Bootstrap, you can't customize your components. And then with Tailwind CSS, it's utility classes. You have all the freedom in the world to customize your components. And Tailwind CSS is like inline CSS. So yeah, that's the main differences between the two.
So Tailwind's inline. So what is Bootstrap? Are we putting class names within the class component?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you can say that.
Okay, perfect. So the benefits of the CSS framework versus using vanilla CSS would be because it's faster to get styles on the page. Is that correct?
Yes, you can say that. And so I'd say the two main advantages of using a CSS framework is one, it speeds up your development process. So with a CSS framework, you don't have to code everything from scratch all the time, because with a framework, it helps you to develop those components much quicker than building them from scratch using pure CSS. And then the second advantage is it enables cross-browser functionality. And so with CSS, there is a thing of your website doesn't look the same on every browser. Maybe your website looks nice on Google Chrome, but it doesn't look nice on Safari, or it doesn't look nice on Firefox. And so using a framework, it curbs all that problem, because it's going to take care of making sure that your website looks the same on every browser. And a nice thing is that with a CSS framework, it also eliminates browser-specific bugs. And so that's one of the advantages of using a framework.
Oh, that is very nice, because I know sometimes Google and Firefox and Safari don't play nice together when it comes to styling. So it's nice to have that out of the box.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, what's the difference between SASS, LESS, and CSS frameworks?
Okay, so the difference is that, so I must confess, I personally have not used SASS, but I have seen how it looks in other people's projects. And the differences that I have noticed is that SASS and LESS, they are both like supersets of vanilla CSS. Just like TypeScript is a superset for JavaScript, that's how SASS and LESS are to CSS. And the main differences between the three of these tools is that they all have different syntaxes, of course. And with SASS and LESS, I think, is that they provide variables. So instead of like repeating, maybe let's say one property color, instead of repeating color throughout your components, you can just use a variable in your SASS application. And then number two, SASS allows nesting. nesting. And so CSS rules can be nested within each other, which I think that is amazing. The third one is that mixins. So you can create custom functions that can accept parameters and will prevent useless repetitions, which I think is great. And then you can also have extensions in your SASS project, which is like an easy way to inherit the same property from another selector. And then it also has operators like addition, subtracting, dividing, and all those things. And so I'd say those are the main differences between SASS less and vanilla CSS. And yeah, and also less is built with JavaScript and SASS is built with Rust. And yeah, those are the differences that I've noted from those three.
Yeah, those are some very different differences that they have. I use SASS and I use less. I actually never use a Bootstrap or Tailwind. Can you use both like a CSS processor and the CSS frameworks together at once, or is like one or the other?
You know, that is a good question, and I never thought it would be possible, but I just Googled that it is possible. And so I guess it is possible, but it's something I've never thought of doing on my own project. When I build a project, it's either I use one framework. So it goes like I use Next.js, I use Tailwind CSS, and maybe I'll use like headless UI for my components. And then that's just it. I just never thought of like mixing all different frameworks in my project. And I just found out it's possible. So I guess there's something to do.
So how do people make their Tailwind CSS very customizable? It sounds like puzzle pieces when it comes to CSS, and everybody's website look the same if we're all using the same frameworks.
That is one of the cons of using a framework, actually, is that your website will look like it was built with Tailwind CSS or Bootstrap. And so there comes a bit of like restrictions with how you use a different framework because, you know, like it's not like you're allowed to use your own syntax when using these frameworks because they have their own syntax. Let me just say that. So you are limited to the designs that you want to bring out into your components. And so, yes, it is possible that sometimes if, you know, everyone builds a Tailwind CSS site, you can visibly see that, okay, this website is built using Tailwind or this website is built using Bootstrap because it's like there's a limitation to how you can design your components, if I can say so. I hope it makes sense. So that's one of the cons of using a framework, basically.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So why would somebody want to have a website that looks like other people's websites?
I mean, if you want to build your website quickly...
That's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to build your website quickly, you have to like make sure that, you know, even if it's a Tailwind site, like make sure that it looks at least different. So build it using Tailwind and CSS at the same time so that it does not look the same. It does happen. I've seen it. And yeah, it's not a nice thing. It's like one of my worst fears when using a framework. I don't want it to look like, you know, like I've actually built it with Tailwind. It has to be discreet. And yeah, that was a tough question. But yeah, that's all I can say.
You're probably a pro and you can like spot a Tailwind website as soon as you go on it. You're like, oh no, they're using Tailwind or they're using Bootstrap. For somebody who's a beginner, what's the best way to go? Like learning just straight CSS by itself or starting off with a CSS framework?
Definitely start learning CSS first, because if you learn CSS, if you know your way around CSS, then learning a framework is going to be so much easier for you. And you won't have to like get stuck learning the framework for that long. And also, I think it's important to know the foundations of the framework that you want to use. And so you can get the best out of, I don't know if I'm making sense, but you can't jump before you can run, people. It's impossible. You have to know CSS first, then you can use a framework, because that's going to allow you to know CSS and give you also that power to be able to debug some issues that you might face while using a framework. And so if you know CSS firsthand, then it's going to be easy for you to know your debugging process, your designing process. You know where to put each, should I say, style to your component. And so I think it's important that you know CSS, the foundations of CSS, before jumping into a framework. That's all I can say to that.
You mentioned debugging. Me personally, I think that CSS is a guessing game. Like, eventually people get really good at guessing because... But what is like some of your debugging techniques when something doesn't align the way you thought it was going to align?
Okay, so you are absolutely correct. When coming to like debugging CSS, I tell you, it's like I have eyes, but they're not functioning well. It's like my eyes are just here for decoration because of how like it can be tedious debugging a CSS code. That is true, but the things I have noticed with myself actually helped me to debug my CSS code faster is, number one, I am prone to making spelling mistakes. And so English is not my first language. And so I know that sometimes the spelling of color might be the problem of why this text is not read, or maybe the spelling of, you know, like any spelling basically, or maybe there's a missing comma or bracket in your CSS selectors, and that might also be a fault. And then the other thing is, what is another thing? So it's spelling, it's missing commas and brackets. And then there is, oh yes, forgetting to link your CSS, your style sheets to your HTML page. It has happened a lot of times to me, like, oh no, like the style is not applied to my header. What is going on? And then I noticed that, oh wait, I forgot to link my CSS style sheet on the head component. And so it does happen that you forget to link up your CSS. And the fourth thing is, I feel like there's something I'm forgetting. Oh yes, being tired. So it does happen that, you know, you've been sitting down for so long, you've been coding, you're tired, and the brain cannot function when it's tired. So it does help to, you know, like to get up and go see the stars or the sun, depending on what time of the day it is. And then you come back feeling refreshed, your mind is clear, then you can see things better to see, oh, okay, I forgot to, you know, to add something or to see my comb or something. But that's how I mainly debug my CSS.
Thank you so much. I have learned so much today about CSS frameworks and CSS in general. Until next time, y'all. Bye.
Bye. Have a nice day.